Good morning, everyone, and welcome to my Ohio garden. Today, I'm hoping you all will join me for the harvest. I'll share what I am picking from the garden here towards the end of summer, as well as a little bit about what I do to use this produce, because many of you have asked, what on earth do you do with all those veggies? So let's jump in. First up are the beans. I'm harvesting snap beans as well as shell beans right now. Now, snap beans are best picked when the pods are plump, but before the seeds inside have started to form. Once the seeds inside start to form, the eating quality of the pods quickly becomes tough. Now, my go-to for preserving beans is either blanching and freezing or pressure canning. This year I've done a combo of both. I've made pickled dilly beans in the past, but I'm the only one in the family that ends up eating them. Now, shell beans are the opposite. They can be picked and eaten any time after the seeds inside have begun to develop. I'll eat them fresh when they're young and tender, and right now all of my shell beans are still at this stage. Check out these gorgeous nightfall beans. And over here are some tiger's eye beans. But for the majority of these beans, I'll let them dry down as much as possible on the plants and then harvest for storage. Now, if we have a particularly rainy late summer where things just don't want to dry down, I will pick these and shell them and then pop them in the dehydrator until they're thoroughly dried, at which point I then pack them into glass mason jars for long-term storage. And it's worth noting that there are some varieties that are dual usage, so you can use them when they are young as snap beans and later when they mature as shell beans. Tongue of Fire is a great variety for this purpose. Also being picked right now, cucumbers. Now, the size at which cucumbers are picked is going to vary significantly based on the type you're growing. For example, some types like Japanese slicers or Dutch hothouse cucumbers can be picked up to 12 to 14 inches in length. Other types are best picked at 3 to 4 inches. I like to pick my picklers at closer to that size. The main thing is to pick them before the seeds inside really start to develop for best eating quality. And with the exception of varieties like lemon cucumbers, you want to pick before the fruit starts to show any signs of yellowing. Now, pickles, of course, are my favorite way to preserve the cucumber harvest. My favorite is a quick refrigerator pickle, but I also do a long fermented pickle as well. I'm not a fan of canned pickles, but I do put up some pickle relish each year. This year, I've got dilly mustard relish and sweet relish. I use a lot of the pickling recipes out of this book, which is where I got the recipes for these relishes. One year, I got the great idea to try pickle chips, where I basically soaked slices of cucumber in vinegar, salt, and dill, and then dehydrated them, and they turned out okay, but not good enough for me to replicate those efforts. I am harvesting tomatillos and their close relative Husk cherries right now as well. Now, don't tell the tomatoes, but there are some years where I think that I actually might like tomatillos even better than tomatoes. There's something about that bright, acidic, citrusy flavor that really hits the spot in so many summer dishes. Now, for the larger green and sometimes purple tomatillos, I wait to harvest until that fruit has fully filled out the husk, ideally when the bottom of that husk just starts to split. However, with the smaller husk cherries, I wait until that outer husk turns a golden brown kind of color and starts to dry down. Many times I'm actually harvesting fruit after they've dropped off the plant, but if they haven't dropped yet, a fully mature fruit will drop at the barest touch of your fingers. You'll want that fruit inside to be a vibrant golden yellow color. They're still good when they're kind of greenish yellow, but they won't develop their highest sugars until they reach that full golden stage. Now, my favorite way to preserve tomatillos is a good salsa verde. The recipe that I most commonly use is very acidic, so it is safe to be water bath canned. My next favorite is a green enchilada sauce, which I can either freeze or pressure can. And with the husk cherries, I tend to use those just for eating fresh. I did try to make husk cherry preserves one year, but that did not go over well with my family. Now, I don't think we can talk about summer harvest without talking about tomatoes. But first, I'd like to take a moment to thank the sponsor of today's video, Birch Living. As all of you gardeners know, gardening can be a lot of hard work. And for me personally, I don't have the energy to get it all done if I don't get a good night's sleep. That is why I opted for a mattress from Birch Living. A couple of years ago, I was faced with having to replace our old worn-out mattress. But I wanted to make sure to get something that was free of unnecessary chemicals and pollutants, things that could potentially be off-gassing into my home. I researched a ton of options. But for me, a Green Guard Gold Certified Birch natural mattress was the easy choice. Free of fiberglass and polyurethane-based foams, crafted instead with 100% organic wool. A perfect material due to its natural flame resistance and resistance to allergens and molds. I hate shopping, so I also really appreciated how easy it was to order online and the fact that Birch offers a 100-night sleep trial and a 25-year warranty. This mattress was so much more comfortable than our old one. It has that perfect balance of support and softness that's ideal for a great night's sleep after working all day in the garden. My husband and I have been so happy with our Birch mattress that we decided to get them for the kids as well. My oldest tends to have issues with allergies, so the hypoallergenic nature of this mattress made it the obvious choice. It was love at first sleep for them as well. Except that my oldest said the Birch mattress is so comfortable she may never get out of bed. The whole family loves their Birch mattresses. We've never slept better. If you're looking for a new bed, check out Birch Living. Their Labor Day sale is running now. It's the perfect time to upgrade your sleep with 25% off a Birch mattress plus 2 free Eco Rest pillows. Visit birchliving.com/Growfully or scan the QR code on the screen to find out more about this limited time offer. Now, back to the garden. Now, picking tomatoes. Mature tomatoes tend to run the gambit of colors and sizes when they're mature. This year alone in my garden, I've got red, pink, purple, gold, orange, and plenty of bicolors. So for me, it's just important to keep straight when I'm growing a lot of varieties what the end color is supposed to be so I know when to pick. Now, I know there's some debate on this topic, but I am on team wait till the tomatoes are fully colored up prior to picking. I know that there are plenty of people that advocate picking early and letting these ripen, say, on your kitchen counter. And this can be a good tactic if you are growing varieties that are prone to cracking. A lot of the old heirlooms tend to be this way, but my personal preference is to wait till these fully color up prior to picking. Now, in terms of preserving the tomato harvest, I think there are as many ways to preserve tomatoes as there are gardeners, but I'm going to share just a few of my favorite, most commonly used methods. Of course, I can plenty of tomato sauce and salsa, but I don't really follow a recipe. Typically for my sauce, I juice my tomatoes and then cook them down with peppers and onions and garlic until I get a nice consistency. Then I throw in my salt and my herbs and can. I also love making roasted cherry tomatoes as I show in this video. And this can be done with chopped up full-size tomatoes too. And I either use this as is or just put a stick blender in the jar and mix it up for a quick sauce. Similarly, I love to dehydrate small fruited tomatoes. I slice grape or cherry tomatoes in half, dehydrate, and then pack in glass jars with oil, salt, and Italian herbs. I also try to can some plain old diced up tomatoes every year, and when I just run out of energy and time, I throw whole unblemished tomatoes into Ziploc freezer bags and throw them in the freezer for later use. Another late summer favorite in my garden are the peppers. And much like tomatoes, peppers can come in an enormous array of mature colors, shapes, and sizes. Peppers of all types can also be eaten anytime after the fruit sizes up. So whether that's green or kind of a cream stage, or until they fully mature to their finished color, which is often red or orange or yellow. The thing to keep in mind is that once they have colored up, that's when your sugar levels are going to be the highest. Now, as far as preserving my peppers, I'm pretty simple. My go-to for sweet peppers is simply to chop them or slice them, pack them in Ziploc bags or vacuum seal bags, and throw them in the freezer. For hot peppers, they're either going into salsa or my favorite, fermented hot sauce. And with jalapenos, my go-to is smoking them and either canning or freezing them. Next up, eggplant. Now again, because eggplant comes in all kinds of shapes and sizes and colors, the key to picking most varieties is to get the fruit when it is glossy and still firm. You don't want to see a dull appearance or any signs of yellowing. Now, I'll be honest, we're not the biggest eaters of eggplant here, though I do make a mean eggplant Napoleon, so I rarely preserve any eggplant. One year, as an experiment, I did make some eggplant jerky, but much like my dill pickle chips, they weren't good enough to repeat the effort. And the zucchini and summer squash harvest continues into late summer as well. I just saw an article the other day where someone mentioned that squash vine borer was nature's way of stopping the zucchini harvest, because I'm sure, as some of you other gardeners have experienced, sometimes by this point in the season, we are just sick to death of zucchini, but my plants are continuing to produce, so I'm using the harvest as best I can. Now with zucchini, we have all seen those pictures of monster zucchini, and it's probably happened to you as well. I know that sometimes I'll come out here, think I have everything harvested, and then inevitably come out the next day and there's like a 20-pounder sitting out here that somehow I missed. And they grow to those sizes seemingly overnight. And while you can use those big zucchini, probably one of the best usages is shredding them up for something like zucchini bread. I prefer to pick zucchini and summer squash at a smaller size. So much like the cucumbers, I find they're best before the seeds inside get very mature. And I like to pick them at about a 6 to 8 inch length. Now, as far as managing the zucchini harvest, I like the old tactic of slipping them into people's cars or porches when they're not looking. But when that fails, we use as much as we can eat fresh. So I like to saute them, of course, put them into baked goods or soups. Zoodles are a favorite of mine. And you can freeze or dehydrate summer squash and zucchini. Now, I've tried the frozen zoodles and I wasn't a big fan. So typically, to preserve my summer squash, I just shred up my zucchini or summer squash, pack them into freezer boxes, and pop in the freezer. I know lots of people love to make relish or pickles with zucchini and summer squash as well. I'm just not a big fan. I like my cucumbers better than my zucchinis for that usage. I'm also harvesting this slightly less glamorous member of the celery family, Celeriac or celery root. Now, celeriac can be harvested anytime after this swollen portion of the stem begins to size up. You can harvest it at a quite immature stage for a stronger flavor, or let it reach full maturity. And typically, these are going to be about 4 to 4.5 inches in size. Now, this was a rough year for celeriac here in Ohio, so these look a little rough this year. Typically, mine look better than this, but I still got a harvest off of this plot. And for storage, I simply dig these up, remove the green tops, and cut off the feeder roots, throw them in Ziploc baggies, and put them in the crisper drawer of the fridge. They will actually keep for 6 to 8 months this way. Next up, sweet corn. Now, like tomatoes, I count corn as one of the quintessential summer crops. If you're new to growing sweet corn, sometimes it can be a bit tricky to tell exactly when it should be harvested. One of the first signs that I look for is that the silks are dried down and brown. If they still have a blondish color, it's too early. And if they've completely dried down and are starting to actually fall off, the corn is probably over mature. You can also feel the ears through the husk to make sure that those ears are fully filled out. And if you're really unsure, you can always peel a bit of the husk back, take a peek at those kernels inside, and if they're not fully plump and filled out, close that husk back up, and you can rubber band it or clothespin it until the ear is mature. Now, with a perfectly mature ear of corn, you're looking for those kernels inside to be plump and juicy, and if you poke them with a fingernail, you should get a fair amount of juice or milk coming out of the kernel. If the kernels have started to get kind of a sunken look to the centers, that ear is over mature. Now, with preserving corn, I rely on 2 methods. I either blanch and freeze, or I pressure can. I saw a tip floating around social media that said you could just leave the ears in the husk, chop off the ends, pack them into Ziploc bags, and freeze them just like that. and that when you thawed them out and cooked them, they tasted like fresh corn on the cob. If anyone tries this and it's worked for you, I'd love to hear about it. Ultimately, it would have taken up too much room in my freezer, so I've not tried that method yet. Some of my favorite late summer snacks, melons of all kinds, are ripening up right now. To pick the perfectly ripe watermelon, I use the tendril trick and look to that first tendril after the main stem connects to the vine. If that tendril is brown and dried down, the watermelon is ripe for picking. If it's still green, I've got to wait a bit longer. Now, I talked about this method in more detail in an older video, but I had a lot of folks who said, well, the tendril was dried down and brown, but my melon was only 3 inches and it was completely immature. What is probably going on there, and the thing I forgot to mention in that video, which I should have, is that the tendril trick only works if your plants are healthy. So a lot of times with watermelon, if there is damage or disease, those tendrils and vines can start to die and turn brown far before the watermelons are actually ripe. So you just want to make sure that if you're using that method, that your plants are actually healthy. Now, unfortunately, with other types of melons, figuring out when to pick isn't always so cut and dry. With the many different kinds of melons on the market, there are cantaloupes, honeydew, crenshaw, gallia, piel del sapo, canary, the list goes on. And a lot of them have different ways to tell if the melons are actually ripe. Now, with traditional Eastern cantaloupe, something that folks around here tend to call Indiana melons, those types of melons are harvested at what is called full slip. And that basically means that those melons are going to essentially just fall off of the vine with the lightest touch when you go to pick them. If you encounter any resistance at all when you try to pull them off the plant, they're not ripe. However, there are other types of melon, even other types of cantaloupe, like sometimes long shelf life types or Western shippers, that don't necessarily slip when they are ripe. So it can be more difficult to tell. Some melons will give you a color change indicator. Canary melons, for example, will turn a vibrant golden yellow when they're ripe. Other types may only give you the slightest change, and sometimes that's something as small as the netting that covers the rind creeping up into the stem. Now, at times, the seed packet will give you this information, but if it doesn't, it's worth doing a little digging to find out exactly when the type of melon that you are growing should be harvested. Now, as far as preserving watermelon and other types of melons, I don't. We generally eat them up fresh so fast that I don't have any leftovers to worry about. And any that I do have left, my chickens love them so much that I do tend to give the chickens some as a late summer treat. If you do end up with a lot of extra, one of the easiest ways to preserve melon is to simply scoop out the flesh, remove the seeds, and freeze. This frozen flesh can be enjoyed later, almost like a sorbet, or blended into smoothies. Now, like many things, my elderberries are a bit late to mature this year. Many years I'm picking them earlier than right now, but this is when they're ripening, so this is when we're picking. Now with elderberries, you're looking for the majority of this fruit head to be turning this deep purple black. You don't want to have green berries in the mix. Now elderberries can notoriously be a bit of a pain to work with because they're tiny and they tend to stain hands big time. But my go-to is typically just snipping off these fruit clusters, dropping them into Ziploc bags, and then freezing them. This makes it a little easier to work with the berries. And then after they've been frozen, I process them into elderberry syrup. So that pretty much wraps up what I am harvesting from my Ohio garden at the end of summer. And I'd love to hear from you. Drop a line in the comments below and let me know what you are picking from your gardens right now. And if you enjoyed today's video, please consider subscribing to my channel, Growfully with Jenna. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.